The evening began like any other calm night at Blue Orchid Restaurant, a quiet, dimly lit place tucked between busy city streets. Soft jazz floated through the speakers, and the air smelled of freshly grilled steak and warm garlic butter. People talked in gentle tones, laughing occasionally, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere that made this place special. Among the guests sat Steven Seagal, dressed simply in a dark jacket, his long hair tied back neatly. He wasn't there as a celebrity, a martial arts icon, or a movie legend. Tonight, he was just a man trying to enjoy a quiet dinner. He preferred places like this, places where people respected boundaries and didn't rush to grab a photo. And fortunately, most customers were either too polite or too uncertain to approach him. Steven sat alone in a corner booth, sipping hot tea, his posture relaxed but alert, the kind of natural awareness that comes from decades of training. A few staff members recognized him but avoided interrupting. They knew he valued peace more than attention. Everything felt calm, almost too calm. A waitress approached with a warm smile. "Is everything all right, Mr. Seagal?" Steven nodded gently. "Perfect. Thank you." Before she could walk away, the glass door swung open with a loud slam, a sound so sudden that half the restaurant looked up. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped inside, talking loudly on his phone, dropping F-bombs like punctuation marks. His voice clashed with the restaurant's quiet elegance. The atmosphere shifted. His name was Kyle, but nobody knew it yet. All they noticed was his arrogance, his aggressive walk, his raised chin, his loud, disrespectful tone. He brushed past a server carrying drinks, almost knocking the tray over. The poor kid apologized, even though he wasn't at fault. Kyle didn't even look back. Steven glanced up briefly, his eyes narrowing, not with anger, but assessment. A man like him didn't need emotion to understand danger. He simply sensed it. And Kyle brought chaos with him like a storm cloud entering a clear sky. Little did anyone in that restaurant know. This loud stranger was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Because in less than 5 minutes, his path would collide with Steven Seagal's, and nothing about the evening would stay peaceful anymore. Kyle strutted through the restaurant like he owned the place. His heavy boots thumped against the polished wooden floor, each step cutting through the calm ambience like a blade. Still talking loudly on his phone, he waved his free hand aggressively, clearly annoyed at whoever was on the other end of the call. "No, listen to me," he barked. "If they don't sign the deal by tomorrow, I'll shut the whole project down. I don't care who cries about it." A couple seated near the entrance exchanged uneasy glances. Another table fell uncomfortably silent. The staff hesitated. Should they say something? But Kyle had the kind of energy that made everyone want to avoid trouble. Except one man quietly sipping his tea. Steven Seagal observed from his booth, his expression unreadable. Years of discipline had taught him to measure people quickly. And Kyle was the kind of man who confused loudness with strength, arrogance with authority. Kyle finally ended the call with a frustrated sigh, shoving his phone into his pocket. He looked around, displeased with the seating options, and snapped his fingers at the nearest waiter. "Hey, you," he said, pointing. "Is this the best lighting you got? Looks like a funeral home in here." The waiter forced a polite smile. "Sir, this is our standard ambience." "Standard?" Kyle scoffed loudly. "You call this standard? My garage has better lighting. Bring me to a decent table. And hurry up, yeah." The poor waiter nodded quickly and guided him toward an open table. But Kyle stopped abruptly, because to get there, he needed to pass Steven Seagal's booth. Instead of walking normally, he clumsily brushed against Steven's table, jostling it hard enough to shake Steven's teacup. A tiny ripple formed in the cup. Just a ripple. That was the only sign that something had happened. Kyle didn't even glance back. He simply kept walking. The waiter winced. Several customers gasped softly, waiting to see Steven's reaction. But Steven remained still, composed, watching Kyle with a kind of deep, quiet study. Steven was not offended. He was assessing. Kyle dropped into his chair, loudly complaining before he even sat down properly. "Finally," he muttered. "Service in this place is a joke." The waiter handed him a menu, but Kyle didn't take it. Instead, he waved it away. "No thanks. I know what I want. Bring me the biggest steak you got. Rare. And make it fast. I'm starving." "Of course, sir," the waiter replied gently. Kyle leaned back, stretching his arms arrogantly, loudly cracking his knuckles as if daring anyone to challenge his presence. His voice echoed again. "This better be good. I didn't come here for disappointment." Tables nearby shifted uncomfortably. Customers went back to whispering. And yet, something else started happening too. People began discreetly glancing back at Steven Seagal, realizing he had remained perfectly calm despite the bump and the disrespect. Some expected him to stand. Others expected him to react with authority. But Steven merely lifted his cup again, taking another small sip, completely unbothered. Calmness unnerves troublemakers more than aggression. And Kyle's eyes eventually drifted toward the booth he had brushed past earlier. He didn't recognize Steven. He didn't know he had nearly started an avalanche. But he sensed something in the stillness of that man. "Who's that guy?" Kyle muttered, narrowing his eyes. A waitress refilling water nearby hesitated. "That's Steven Seagal, sir." Kyle frowned. "Who?" The waitress blinked. "Steven Seagal, the martial artist? Actor." Kyle shrugged carelessly. "Never heard of him." His arrogance was a shield, one made of ego, not awareness. The waitress gave a small nod and walked away, shaking her head slightly. Meanwhile, Kyle continued to glare at Steven as if trying to figure out why everyone respected him so much. Steven felt the stare but ignored it. And that irritated Kyle even more. Moments later, the restaurant manager approached Kyle cautiously. "Sir, we kindly ask customers to keep noise levels low for the comfort of others." Kyle's face twisted instantly. "Are you serious?" he said, raising his voice even louder. "I talk how I want. If these people don't like it, they can go somewhere else." The manager kept his tone steady. "Please, sir, this is a peaceful establishment." Kyle's laugh was mocking. "Peaceful? More like boring. And you," he pointed toward Steven's booth, "you think you're better than everyone? Sitting there pretending like you didn't hear me." Steven calmly looked up. "I'm just trying to enjoy my evening. You should too." The calmness of that sentence struck like a nerve. Kyle's ego flared. "Oh, I'll enjoy it," he sneered. "Don't you worry." The tension in the room tightened like a wire. "Where are you watching from? Comment your city and country. I'm reading every one." The restaurant fell silent. Everyone knew what was coming next. Kyle wasn't done. His storm had only begun. And Steven Seagal, quiet, composed, and experienced, knew the situation was headed somewhere dangerous. But he remained still, allowing the moment to unfold. The arrogant customer thought he had the upper hand. He had no idea. He had just poked a sleeping dragon. Kyle couldn't stop glaring at Steven, even as the waiter placed water on his table. Something about Steven's silence bothered him, not because Steven looked threatening, but because he didn't look intimidated at all. Bullies hate calm people. Calmness exposes their insecurity. Steven sat with a relaxed posture, hands resting gently on the table, as if he were meditating rather than dining. His face looked peaceful, expression neutral. But underneath that quiet surface was a man who'd faced real danger in life, far worse than an oversized ego in a restaurant. Kyle finally snapped. He stood up abruptly, chair screeching against the floor. The noise sliced through the restaurant, making customers flinch. People turned to look, whispering nervously. Kyle took slow, aggressive steps toward Steven's booth. Steven didn't move. He simply looked up, meeting Kyle's eyes with a calm that felt like a mirror, reflecting the man's own anger back at him. "You got a problem with me?" Kyle demanded loudly. Steven shook his head. "No problem." Kyle scoffed. "Yeah, you do. I can tell. You've been giving me attitude since I walked in." "I haven't said a word to you," Steven replied with steady clarity. "Exactly." Kyle pointed accusingly. "That's your attitude." A woman sitting 2 tables away whispered to her husband, "He's picking a fight with the wrong person." The husband nodded slowly. He has no idea who that man is. But Kyle wasn't listening to anyone. He stepped even closer, invading Steven's personal space. "What, you think you're some kind of tough guy?" Kyle taunted. Steven's voice remained controlled. "Sit down. Enjoy your meal. There's no need for this." Steven wasn't afraid. He wasn't even annoyed. He simply wanted to de-escalate. But people like Kyle mistake calmness for weakness. Kyle smirked. "Oh, I'll enjoy it. But not until you stop acting like you're better than me." Steven sighed quietly. "Go back to your table." Kyle leaned in, his face inches away. "Make me." For the first time, a flicker of warning crossed Steven's eyes. Just a flicker. Several customers stood up, unsure what would happen next. A waiter dropped a spoon in nervousness. The tension was thick enough to cut. Steven slowly rose from his seat. He didn't stand abruptly or dramatically. He simply stood, controlled, balanced, composed. Kyle instantly stepped back a half-inch, as if on instinct. Steven wasn't a big man, not compared to Kyle's bulky frame. But size wasn't the reason Kyle felt that reflexive jolt of fear. It was presence. Steven Seagal had the presence of a man who understood violence intimately and knew exactly how to manage it. "Listen," Steven said calmly. "You don't want to do this." Kyle forced a laugh, trying to recover from that involuntary step back. "Oh, I do," he said loudly, hoping the crowd would think he was brave. But the crowd wasn't thinking that at all. They were thinking, "This man is about to humiliate himself." Kyle poked Steven's chest. "You think you're some martial arts hero or something?" Steven simply stared at him. Kyle poked again. "What are you gonna do?" "Huh." Steven exhaled slowly. "I don't fight people. Especially not in restaurants." "Oh, you will," Kyle snarled. "I'll make you." He shoved Steven's shoulder, the first physical escalation. The room gasped collectively. Steven didn't even sway. It was like pushing a rooted tree. Kyle's frustration spiked. "What? You scared?" Steven shook his head gently. "No. I just don't want to hurt you." The arrogance on Kyle's face transformed into anger. "You hurt me!" Kyle shouted. "That's funny." The manager rushed over, panicked. "Sir, please. Sit down. This is not appropriate." But Kyle shoved the manager aside with one hand. And that was the moment everything changed. Steven's demeanor shifted. Not dramatically, not angrily, but decisively. He stepped between Kyle and the manager, placing himself like a silent shield. "That's enough," Steven said in a tone colder than steel. Kyle misread that final warning. People like him always do. "Or what?" he challenged. "What are you gonna do?" His sentence wasn't finished before he swung a sloppy punch toward Steven's head. It happened fast, too fast for the untrained eye. Steven didn't dodge dramatically or counterpunch like in movies. He simply turned slightly, redirected the punch with a subtle hand movement, and placed Kyle's own momentum against him. Kyle stumbled forward, confused. "What the—" He swung again, angrier this time. Another effortless redirection. Kyle was fighting air. Steven wasn't attacking him. He was just neutralizing him, barely moving more than necessary. The crowd watched in awe. Kyle grew more frustrated, more clumsy, more unbalanced. This wasn't a fight. This was a painful lesson. He threw a third punch. And that was the one Steven finally decided to end. A simple twist of Kyle's wrist, a gentle downward shift of Steven's weight. Thud. Kyle hit the floor before he even realized what had happened. The restaurant went silent. Kyle blinked up at Steven, stunned. What was that? Steven stepped back, giving him space. That was me not fighting you. Kyle's breath shook. For the first time that evening, fear entered his eyes. He had just attacked a martial arts legend, and been disarmed like a child. The humiliation burned through him. If someone tried to pick a fight with you for no reason, what would you do? Stay calm or react? Comment below. The confrontation wasn't over yet. But Kyle's regret? It had already begun. Kyle lay on the floor, dazed, staring up at the restaurant ceiling as if it had suddenly tilted sideways. His mind scrambled to understand what had just happened. 1 second he was throwing punches, the next he was staring at the lights, wondering how he'd gotten there. Steven Seagal didn't move closer. He didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply adjusted his jacket and quietly stepped back, giving Kyle room to stand if he wanted to. The crowd murmured in disbelief. A middle-aged man whispered. He didn't even hit him. He just redirected him. A woman near the bar added. That was effortless. Scary effortless. Kyle pushed himself up, face flushed, ego wounded deeper than any physical injury. The humiliation stung more than the fall. And humiliation, especially in front of an audience, can turn arrogant men into something even worse. Desperate. I slipped, Kyle muttered loudly, trying to save face. The floor's slippery. But everyone had seen the truth. The floor wasn't slippery. His pride was. Kyle stood up, shaking with anger. His jaw tightened. His fists clenched so hard his knuckles turned white. Steven watched him silently, his hands still relaxed at his sides. He wasn't preparing to fight. He was preparing to stop a fight. Don't do this, Steven warned softly. But those 3 words only made Kyle explode further. Oh, you think you're smart? Kyle growled. You think you're better than me? You think you can just embarrass me like that? I didn't embarrass you, Steven replied. You did. The truth hit Kyle harder than any punch could. And that triggered him. Kyle lunged forward with a wild roar, this time with both hands raised, going for a full-blown tackle. Chairs slid, customers gasped, a waiter screamed. But what happened next felt like slow motion. Steven stepped aside with minimal effort, one smooth pivot of the hips. Kyle's arms grasped empty air. His momentum carried him forward. And Steven guided him with one hand on the back of his shoulder, redirecting him exactly where he was already moving. Crash! Kyle slammed into a nearby table, almost flipping it over. Dishes shattered. The restaurant erupted with exclamations and gasps. Kyle grunted, stumbling back up again. His face turned red, not from pain, but pure rage. You show off, he barked, spitting anger. Stand still and fight like a man. Steven inhaled slowly, his face still calm, voice still steady. I don't fight people, he said again. I neutralize violence. Kyle didn't understand the difference. People like him never do. He charged again. And again. And every attempt ended the same way. A flick of Steven's wrist. A shift of his weight. A subtle sidestep. And Kyle was back on the floor, or stumbling, or crashing into something else. It wasn't even a fight anymore. It was a demonstration. Watching it felt like seeing a toddler trying to wrestle an adult. Sad, embarrassing, and inevitable. Steven never struck him once. Not a single punch. Not a single kick. Not even a shove. Just pure redirection, classic Aikido technique, the art Steven had spent decades mastering. The crowd stared in awe. Some recorded on their phones. Others simply watched, amazed. A teenager whispered, "He's not even breaking a sweat." A waiter muttered, "That guy's attacking a legend, and he doesn't know it." Kyle, now breathing heavily, face sweaty and red, looked more like a man fighting gravity than a person fighting another human being. Still, he refused to quit. His ego wouldn't let him. He grabbed a chair, lifting it clumsily like he planned to swing it. The restaurant gasped again. Steven's expression finally changed, slightly. Not fear. Not anger. Just disappointment. "Don't do that," Steven warned. But Kyle swung. Steven stepped forward in a single smooth movement. His hand caught the chair mid-air, not forcefully, but with precision, and twisted it downward. Kyle lost his grip instantly. The chair hit the floor. Kyle's arm was redirected again. His body followed the direction of Steven's motion, and Kyle landed flat on his back for the fourth time. This time, he didn't get up quickly. He lay there, exhausted, humiliated, panting. The restaurant was silent. Steven looked down at him with sympathy, not superiority. "You're not a bad person," he said softly. "Just someone who confuses anger with strength." Kyle stared up at him, shocked. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever handled him like that. A single tear of frustration welled up in Kyle's eye, though he quickly blinked it away. He had attacked a martial arts legend, and Steven hadn't even fought back. He had only defended. And that made the defeat hurt even more. Steven stepped backward, giving Kyle space to recover his dignity, or what was left of it. The crowd felt it too. This wasn't violence. This was a lesson. A lesson Kyle had never been taught before. A lesson he would never forget. And as the room remained frozen in silence, everyone realized this was no ordinary man Kyle had attacked. He had just learned the unmistakable truth. Steven Seagal was on another level. Kyle stayed on the floor longer this time, not because he couldn't stand, but because standing meant facing a truth he wasn't ready to accept. His chest rose and fell sharply, breaths ragged from anger, exhaustion, and humiliation. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. Around him, the restaurant slowly exhaled. People whispered, softly, cautiously, as if afraid their words would spark another explosion. "Is he done?" someone murmured. "I hope so," another replied. Steven remained standing a few feet away, posture calm, breathing steady, body language completely unthreatening. He wasn't towering over Kyle. He wasn't intimidating him. He simply watched, with an expression that wasn't anger, but concern. A kind of concern that frustrated Kyle even more. He had expected a fight. He had expected punches. He had expected someone to fight fire with fire. But instead, Steven gave him something Kyle didn't know how to respond to. Patience. Control. Grace. And that made the defeat sting even worse. Kyle finally pushed himself up, groaning. But instead of charging again, he sat on his knees for a moment, staring at the floor, not out of defeat, but out of confusion. What are you?" Kyle muttered. Steven didn't smile. He didn't brag. He simply said, "Someone who doesn't want to see you ruin your life." Kyle blinked. "Ruin my life." The words hit deeper than any physical strike could have. Steven continued, voice calm but firm. "You're angry at something," he said. "But it's not me. I'm just standing in front of you." Kyle swallowed hard, throat tight. He hated how true that sounded. Steven took one small step closer, not threatening, just present. "You walked in here ready to explode," Steven added softly. "Anyone in your way would have been your target tonight." Kyle clenched his jaw. "You don't know anything about me." Steven nodded. "Then tell me." Kyle's eyes widened slightly. He wasn't expecting that. He wasn't used to people asking what he was feeling. Usually, they just avoided him or obeyed him. He felt suddenly exposed, like Steven could see the anger beneath the surface, the insecurity behind the arrogance. For a moment, Kyle's voice softened. I've had a rough day." Steven raised an eyebrow. "We all have rough days. But not everyone throws furniture at strangers." The room exhaled a small, nervous laugh. Even Kyle cracked a bitter smile. Steven crossed his arms, not defensively, but thoughtfully. "You think yelling makes you strong?" he asked quietly. "You think starting fights makes you powerful?" Kyle didn't answer. Steven stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Real strength is control. Real strength is restraint. Real strength is knowing when to walk away." Kyle looked down again, face flushing with shame. He hated how honest the words sounded. He hated that they made sense. He hated that he had acted like a child in front of everyone. But more than anything, he hated that Steven wasn't even angry with him. Because that meant the problem wasn't Steven. The problem was him. For the first time since entering the restaurant, Kyle's tone changed completely, quieter, almost defeated. I didn't think it would go like this," he confessed. "I just snapped." Steven nodded. "I know." Kyle frowned. "But why didn't you hit me back? Why didn't you fight me?" Steven shrugged lightly. What would that solve? Kyle thought about it. He had no answer. Steven leaned back slightly. "Hurting you wouldn't teach you anything. Showing you control might." Kyle felt his throat tighten again. Something stirred in him, something unfamiliar. Respect. And it scared him more than any punch could have. Steven continued, "You're not weak, but you let your anger control you. And that makes you dangerous, not to others, but to yourself." Kyle swallowed. He had never heard someone describe him that way. Dangerous to himself. He had always thought his aggression kept him in control. But now, seeing the mess he'd caused, the broken plates, the terrified staff, the embarrassment, he realized Steven was right. Kyle sat fully on the floor now, knees up, hands dangling loosely. He whispered, "I'm sorry." The restaurant froze for a moment, stunned. No one expected that. And Steven didn't respond immediately. He didn't rush to accept the apology. He simply nodded once, slowly. "Good," Steven said. "Now start by apologizing to the people you scared." Kyle turned, scanning the room. Every pair of eyes was on him, not with hatred, but cautious expectation. Kyle inhaled deeply. It felt like swallowing broken glass. But he said it anyway. "I'm sorry," he said, louder this time. "To all of you. I shouldn't have acted like that." A few people nodded. Some even softened. Steven stepped back, allowing Kyle to stand on his own. No humiliation, no pressure. Kyle rose to his feet slowly, still shaken but different now. Humbled. Grounded. A man who had faced himself, and didn't like what he saw. He turned to Steven. "You didn't have to handle it that way," Kyle said quietly. "Yes," Steven replied calmly. "I did." "Why?" Steven gave a small, almost fatherly smile. "Because someone has to break the cycle." Kyle nodded, stunned. Steven wasn't just stronger. He was wiser. And for the first time all evening, Kyle felt grateful. He had come in arrogant. He had attacked out of ego. He had acted like a brute. But Steven Seagal had responded like a teacher. And Kyle knew. This moment would stay with him forever. The restaurant sat in stunned silence. For a few seconds, it was as if the world had paused. The plates, the shattered glass, the spilled drinks, all of it faded into the background. The real story was unfolding between the two men in the center of the room. Kyle, shaken and humbled, and Steven Seagal, calm and unshaken, standing like a master of his domain. People slowly began whispering. Phones were out. A few started recording the scene, careful not to attract attention. Others leaned closer, eyes wide, watching the aftermath. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What had started as a tense and potentially violent confrontation had turned into something almost unbelievable. "Did you see that?" a young woman whispered to her friend. "He didn't even touch him. How is that possible?" A man by the bar shook his head. "That's Steven Seagal. I've seen his movies. That's the real deal." Even the staff, who had been terrified moments before, began to regain composure. The manager approached slowly, cautious but relieved, and spoke with a trembling voice. "Sir, thank you for handling that situation so calmly." Steven nodded politely. "It's not about me. It's about making sure no one gets hurt." Kyle stood there, still breathing heavily, guilt written across his face. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep awareness of his own recklessness. He looked around at the stunned crowd and muttered, almost to himself, I had no idea." "Exactly," Steven said softly, giving him just enough guidance without condescension. "Now you know. And I hope you don't forget it." Some of the customers began whispering to one another, sharing what they had just witnessed. "This is going viral for sure," one said. "Someone should post this online immediately." As predicted, a few people had already uploaded short clips to social media. Within minutes, the videos were starting to spread. Comments began flooding in. "This is why you don't mess with Seagal. Legend doesn't even need to fight to prove his skill. Humility, control, and mastery, wow." Kyle could feel every eye on him. Each person's gaze was a silent reminder of his mistake. He swallowed hard. I guess I learned my lesson," he admitted quietly. A waiter finally approached him. "Sir, you should apologize to the staff for scaring us." Kyle nodded, turning to each of the employees he had intimidated. His voice was shaky but sincere. "I'm truly sorry. I shouldn't have acted like that." To everyone's relief, the staff accepted the apology. There was still tension, but the atmosphere had softened. The lesson was clear. No one should underestimate quiet strength. Even as Kyle's immediate humiliation faded, the repercussions were only beginning. Word of the incident had already reached social media, and news outlets were picking up the story. Clips of the encounter went viral almost instantly. Within an hour, millions had watched the videos, with hashtags trending everywhere. Hashtag Seagal legend, hashtag instant regret, hashtag martial arts master. People from around the world were commenting. Some shared similar stories about encounters with martial arts masters. Others debated what they would have done in Kyle's shoes. Have you ever witnessed someone get instant regret after acting arrogant? Share your story in the comments. We're reading them all. Meanwhile, Kyle stood quietly, absorbing the scope of what had just happened. The adrenaline rush had faded, leaving only shame and the sharp sting of realization. He had walked in with confidence, believing he was untouchable. Now, he knew that strength was more than muscle or aggression. Strength was composure, skill, and patience, the qualities Steven had displayed effortlessly. Steven, on the other hand, simply returned to his booth. He sipped his tea as if nothing had happened. But the entire restaurant had changed because of his calm presence. People whispered not only about his skill but about the way he had handled the situation. He hadn't humiliated Kyle unnecessarily. He hadn't shown off. He had simply demonstrated mastery and control, and in doing so, he had taught a lesson no words could fully express. The manager finally exhaled, relieved that the incident was over without serious injury. "Thank you for handling it so perfectly," he said. Steven merely nodded. "It's not about perfection. It's about responsibility." Kyle's shoulders slumped. He finally understood something essential, that arrogance, impulsiveness, and aggression rarely end well, especially when faced with someone who had mastered restraint. He looked at Steven with a mixture of awe and humility. The restaurant returned slowly to normal, but the story didn't end there. Phones continued to capture every angle, uploading every clip. Within hours, the incident was trending worldwide. Social media users marveled at Steven's skill, his calm, and Kyle's instant transformation from arrogance to regret. And somewhere in the chaos, Kyle made a silent promise: never again underestimate someone who appears calm. Strength comes in many forms, and the most dangerous kind is quiet, controlled, and unassuming. By the time the evening ended, the incident had become more than a simple restaurant confrontation. It was a lesson, a viral story, and a reminder of what true mastery looks like: humble, composed, and infinitely powerful. By the time the evening came to a close, the restaurant had returned to a semblance of calm. The tables were cleaned, the shattered glass cleared, and the staff was cautiously smiling again. But the energy lingered, electric, almost palpable. Everyone who had witnessed the confrontation knew they had seen something extraordinary. Within minutes, smartphones were uploading videos, snippets, and slow-motion clips of the confrontation. The internet did what it does best: it took notice. By the next hour, hashtags were trending: hashtag Seagal legend, hashtag instant regret, hashtag martial arts master, and hashtag quiet power. Comments flooded in from every corner of the globe. People shared their astonishment. "I've never seen someone handle a bully like that, without throwing a single punch. That's not just skill. That's control, intelligence, and calm mastery." Kyle learned the hard way. Respect earns respect. The incident became more than just a restaurant story. It became a viral lesson in humility, strength, and composure. Clips were shared across Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Some channels even slowed down the footage, highlighting each subtle wrist movement, every redirection of Kyle's attacks, showing exactly why Steven Seagal was considered a martial arts legend. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read: "Martial arts legend neutralizes arrogant customer without throwing a punch." Steven Seagal teaches instant lesson in restraint at restaurant. Viral video: "When ego meets discipline." The videos garnered millions of views. People debated, laughed, and marveled at Kyle's misjudgment. Across social media, there were two main reactions: admiration for Steven's calm mastery and incredulity at Kyle's arrogance. For many, it became a teaching moment. Humility, composure, and skill always outperform aggression and ego. Meanwhile, Kyle's own reaction was quietly introspective. No longer the loud, brash man who had stormed into the restaurant, he now understood the weight of his actions. He had underestimated someone based on appearance and attitude, a mistake he would never repeat. He had learned a lesson most people only realize after far too much regret. Steven, sitting calmly at his booth, finished his tea. To the untrained eye, it looked like nothing had happened. But the ripple of impact from those quiet, controlled moments would be felt worldwide. He didn't need to raise his voice, throw a punch, or demand respect. His presence alone conveyed mastery. The story became a global talking point. Martial arts enthusiasts dissected the encounter. Motivational speakers cited it as an example of handling confrontation without unnecessary violence. Everyday viewers shared the video with friends, emphasizing the importance of control over aggression. And in the midst of all this, one lesson stood out clearly. Power isn't shown through loudness, intimidation, or aggression. It's shown through calmness, precision, and understanding. Kyle had learned it the hard way, millions had witnessed it, and Steven Seagal had, once again, taught a lesson that transcended martial arts. As viewers watched Steven step back, allowing Kyle to regain his composure and dignity, it became evident. True strength is not measured by how hard you can hit, but by how effectively you can neutralize chaos without adding more harm. This was the magic of the moment, an instant, unforgettable lesson that went far beyond a restaurant confrontation. If you've ever seen someone underestimate strength, or if you believe that calm, skill, and composure are the ultimate power, do this right now. Like this video to honor mastery over ego. Comment below your city and country, or share a story of witnessing someone learn humility the hard way. Subscribe for more jaw-dropping, real-life lessons where ordinary moments meet extraordinary skill. Because stories like this aren't just entertaining, they teach, inspire, and remind us all, ego might push you to act, but skill and calmness always win the day. And for the millions watching worldwide, one thing is clear. Kyle's arrogance ended with an unforgettable lesson. Steven Seagal's quiet mastery became legendary once again, and the world was reminded why true power is always understated, but never unnoticed.